Obama last night, speaking at the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, said that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and he were still good friends, defended his stance that talks over a Palestinian state should be based on pre-1967 borders along with negotiated land swaps. President Obama, however, did offer assurances that the United States' commitment to Israel's long-term security is ironclad. Netanyahu publicly rebuked the president's Middle East policy from the Oval Office last Friday. Netanyahu is scheduled to address the conference later this evening. Well, joining me now is George Birnbaum, the former chief of staff to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is the CEO of GEB International. George, good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Let me first start by saying that our hearts and prayers go out to all the victims of the recent tornadoes. It's just a terrible story.
Absolutely, and it has been a terrible year, and I appreciate that. George, Netanyahu and Obama, there are lots of ways to say this. Let me be direct. Neither man is overcome with modesty or humility, I think it's fair to say. But this has become a very public scrap, and that doesn't seem to be in anyone's interest. What is going on here?
Well, I think that we're in a situation where the president had given a speech last Thursday, a speech that was billed by everyone in the White House as being a major policy speech, one that lays out his vision for the Middle East. It wasn't a flippant remark or set of remarks made at a press conference, in which he really, in many people's minds, especially in the Israeli point of view, threw Israel under the bus by using phraseology that had really been taboo to use for decades.
And specifically, which terminology is that?
The 1967 border technology, one, and also the reference to the Palestinian refugee issue. Those two things in particular were very troubling for the Prime Minister to hear.
And so troubled was he that he, as you and I have discussed, was very direct in his response. I'm going to put it that way, if I may, with the President of the United States sitting there. To what degree do you think that that was appropriate conduct on the part of any head of state visiting the United States and the President in the White House?
Well, it was a difficult position for the Prime Minister. As he said in that press conference, he sees his role as the role of defending a dream and a path that took over 2,000 years for the Jewish people to achieve, namely the rebirth of the Jewish nation in the land of Israel. And made in part mostly by the friendship and the ally of the United States, a 63-year-old friendship that has been unbreakable. And I think the Prime Minister and the Israeli people were quite hurt, viscerally hurt, by the surprise language used by the President.
What do you, and let me ask you this, what is your sense of the President's motivation in putting forward an idea that, to my knowledge, many leaders have talked about as in one form or another, a result of whatever negotiations would take place between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but certainly never a condition preceding to such a negotiation, that is, a rollback to the pre-67 borders. What could have motivated, in your judgment, the administration?
It's a good question, and one I think many people in Israel and in this country are asking themselves today. This is clearly something the President deeply believes. This was a speech that was vetted by his staff, vetted by the State Department, vetted by the National Security Council. Again, it wasn't something that was an ad hoc comment. So this has to be something that the President deeply believes in and perhaps felt that he was taking a bold step towards trying to resolve not what's a 44, 63-year-old conflict, but really a 2,000-year-old conflict.
Well, a 2,000-year-old conflict, but for the purposes of our head of state, it is an issue of 63 years duration, since the United States was, after all, the first nation to recognize the state of Israel in 1948. The United States has been the principal benefactor of Israel, its principal and often sole protectorate. This is not the way for friends and allies to behave. And it certainly seems to offer, if you will, comfort and succor to the enemies of both Israel and the United States. This public spat, would you think it will be, well, I'm sorry, you're about to say?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. You know, it's funny. Depending on what report you believe, the Prime Minister was notified either 24 or 48 hours before the President's remarks as to what would be in those remarks. And basically, the President took a 63-year-old friendship and policy and reversed course 180 degrees publicly. It's, you know, my cable company gives me more notice than that when they want to make an appointment. So you know, in that sense, it was difficult. But this is a friendship of 63 years. The bonds are very deep, both culturally, value-wise, strategically. I think this will be overcome in the near future. It has to be overcome. America needs Israel just as much as Israel needs America. These are two friends.
Now, why is that? Now, why does the United States need Israel?
Well, Israel, you know, as you have stated before many times, and most people who are keen observers know, the radical Islamic world labels Israel the small Satan and the little Satan, and America the great Satan. And what happens in Israel will happen inevitably to the West. And if Israel is to be threatened by radical Islam and to be slowly taking over, whether it's through the return of refugees or through a diplomatic process that first goes to 67 and then takes more, it's inevitably bound to head towards the United States.
Yeah, and the idea that radical Islam will be an accepted part of any status quo in the immediate or even distant future is certainly antithetical to the interest of the United States as it is to Israel. But this has devolved now into a confrontation between, as I said, two state leaders who are neither overwhelmed by their any sense of modesty. This has to be repaired. Can we expect Benjamin Netanyahu to address this issue at AIPAC later tonight, do you believe?
I think he may address it somewhat. I think the better place and the more appropriate place will be in his speech to a joint session of Congress tomorrow, where the support for Israel is unwavering, and Israel is grateful for the Congress and their overwhelming support, continual support through the decades. So I think tomorrow may be the better and more appropriate place for him to begin to smooth this out. But again, this is a deep, close relationship. Like a marital spout, this will be overcome, and people will at one point go to bed saying, "I love you" again.
Okay, well, I love a happy ending, George. Thanks for providing
As do
that.
I.
George Birnbaum, thanks for being with us. Turning now to domestic policy and the battle over the budget.